Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Fazakerley, and I'm the CIO of MW Solicitors, and it's my pleasure to chair this panel discussion this afternoon. What I'm going to quickly do is introduce our guest star panelists, and then I'll introduce the theme, and then we'll get straight stuck into it. So first of all, our first panelist has more roles than I've had hot dinners. And if you can see on camera, I've had quite a few hot dinners. I'm currently non-exec director of many boards, including Rightmove, the Costain Group, and AO World. She's the chair of Digital Leaders, which is a global initiative that promotes effective digital transformation, and has since 2015 been the president of TechUK. I am, of course, talking about Jacqueline DeRocas CBE. Welcome, Jacqueline. I can all hear you virtually applauding around the country. That's wonderful. Now, the next panelist describes himself as the chief protector of legal things, a cyber Babel fish and technologist. And according to some, and apparently, he's the man of the year in some security magazine somewhere. He is the CISO of Pinsent Masons, and his name is Christian Toon. Welcome, Christian.
Thank you.
We also have someone who's a solicitor by background, a believer very passionately in legal reform and by embracing technology, a 13-year veteran at Vodafone, a head of enterprise, a chief of staff, and now the head of legal operations for Vodafone, Amy McConnell. Welcome, Amy. And
thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And finally, but by no means least, the man of action himself, a military veteran, a former CIO in Her Majesty's Forces, a director and head of information assurance at KPMG, and now the global director of IT at HFW. Please, everyone, give a very big virtual round of applause to our all-star guests. I can hear it coming through now, loud and clear. So today, we're in this Future of Legal Tech talk. Our topic is this: in the post-COVID world, what technology changes are simply an acceleration of what was already underway, or are we seeing truly new thinking, a new reality? And our panelists are going to try and tackle the topics, looking at the risks, the challenges, and the opportunities within each of those. So that's enough of me. Let's turn over to the panel. And to start us off, I'm going to come to Jacqueline. I'm going to say, Jacqueline, what's the new norm? Is there a new norm? What's a permanent change versus a temporary change? Is it going to snap back? Why don't you start us off?
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for that introduction, David, and the opportunity to engage with so many people in this space. I've heard a lot of people change their minds as we've gone further and further into lockdown. And I truly believe we're coming to a stage where we are going to be living with versus snapping back to where we were before. And I'll give you some examples of that. You know, you've all seen the pictures of all of the British Airways fleet on the ground, EasyJet on the ground. I think business travel is possibly one of those areas where, you know, before it was considered critical. I'm wondering whether that now we are relying on Zoom, Skype, Microsoft Teams, WhatsApp, FaceTime, all of these platforms that, you know, rather than flying around the globe, we may decide that we can actually create social connection virtually. So I think that will be one of the areas, especially as we go into a climate of austerity, potential economic pressure, where we will be drastically cost cutting. So I think business travel is going to be one of the permanent changes that will no longer be considered critical. And I think also flexible working and working remotely is another area, which is not embraced by everybody, by the way. It's not everybody who's got ideal conditions to work flexibly. And also I've noticed that I am always on and I'm working perhaps the same hours, but over a longer period of time. So the lines are very much blurred in terms of remote working. But the idea of going back to an office or even an informal office setting like a WeWork or a you know, Starbucks, social distancing is going to mean that hot desking in an informal space is going to be difficult, let alone a formal workspace. So I think flexible working remotely is going to be with us for longer than we think, and possibly we will get better at remote working and acceptance of that, particularly in legal. And then I think there will be seismic shifts in industry. So the high street will look a bit different. Those that did not brace online will probably find it difficult to survive. So I'm not sure I'm being very uplifting in that sense, but I do think that there is an air of pessimism because we will be hit with a recession and lots of jobs, and you know, that's hard to take when we've been on such a growth curve as a country. But I do think we can come out of it with some optimism as well. And I'm looking forward to, you know, for example, wasn't it charming in 2017 when, I don't know if you saw Professor Robert Kelly giving an interview to the BBC about the relationship between South and North Korea at the time, and his marvelous daughter stomping into the background, followed by the baby in the baby walker and the stressed out wife dragging them out. Well, you know, we love the way he tried to keep the composure in that storm of domestic chaos, but that glimpse of home life for a serious man with a geopolitical analysis and the swagger of his little girl who couldn't care less, who didn't relate to that? So I think there's going to be a lot of looking through the keyhole, which is, you know, a marvelous addition and maybe going to change the way in which our tolerance is affected in how we connect. But, you know, it also means that if that was a woman on that call, would that make her look unprofessional? And for a man, would it just make him look rounded? So I worry about diversity, as I do in all the things that I talk about.
Jacqueline, you have made some comments before that you think RPA, robotic process automation, and AI will be needed in the future to maybe augment some talent shortage that might come about because of these changes. Do you want to expand on that a little bit more for me?
Well, we already have a massive skill shortage in the tech industry, and for all of the people who are displaced, I do hope we find a moment to inspire them into tech. But in the absence of that, I think we will have to find more efficiencies in the business. So we will need to have software crawl across our businesses and say, you've got massive amounts of repetition and duplication there, let me put a robot in. And honestly, that tech is there now. So we should be looking at that from an efficiency and productivity perspective anyway. So I think we were doing some of that before, and now the race to digitize and be less reliant on humans and more reliant on tech as we go into our digital future will be more important. So absolutely, I think there'll be more than that. But I do think alongside that, we will need to bring our soft skills and humanity into the workspace so that we don't just become mechanical and machine-like and dominated by technology and process versus the soft skills that we need to make it work.
Okay, Jacqueline, I'm going to pull on a few of your threads there and come across to Christian now. On this, what does the new office look like versus more remote work? The lessons learned, I suppose, from what we've gone through, Christian, into the future. And some threads there around the consumerization of IT. People are doing things differently now in the home with their IT. How does that bleed into work IT? And what are the security implications, if there are security implications, to these changes? Do you want to pick up there, Christian?
Yeah, none at all. I think it's all pretty straightforward. The shadow IT that exists is not a problem in the modern enterprise. Subject to it being controlled and managed correctly, I guess. Moving a business to a new operating platform, not just in a technology sense, but a cultural sense, as we've seen over the last few weeks, has been, I don't think anyone has kind of found it easy. And for us in the legal profession, taking what was kind of quite traditionally 90% of a physical business process and operation and moving it entirely remotely has been not without its challenge. We've seen deltas in technology skills, and we're not talking about coding here, we're just talking about using the consumer technology as an end user. And this is where I think some of the more traditional brands have struggled, because there's a lot of assumptions made from some of the big technology players that people know how to use their equipment. And I guess it's one of the championing thoughts as to why Zoom has zoomed, because it's just intuitive, it's easy to use, and people can get on with it. And I think when faced with challenges where they can't use the technology that they've been afforded, they'll find routes round and will use something that's more easy for them to use or that they're more familiar with. And that's the challenge, and certainly really brings it home to the fact that the technology strategies in any organisation need to be user-friendly, because if they're not, they're just going to put to one side.
Well, Christian, what about those who say, well, you know, we're using Zoom now, it's very intuitive, like you said. There were question marks over its security, some of it unjustified, probably some of it justified. But have we lost control? Perhaps have the IT departments of different firms lost control of the security and of the usage of the apps, because it's very now much more consumer-driven?
I guess every organisation is going to be different, and this isn't, I guess, a response for whether or not Zoom is safe or whether we should be using it or not, or WebEx or Microsoft Teams or others. It all comes down to understanding what's the security risk and for your organisation, and understanding that helps you then make that choice. But also, it's about knowing what your business needs, not what you feel it wants. And if you can find that balance right, then technology teams will be in a better position to serve their customer, to serve that end user, monitoring their estate to see that actually there's a spike in unauthorized VPN usage, or that you're seeing something of technology being used that perhaps isn't part of your kind of normal estate, and start asking those questions as to why. Why are our people using that? And understanding that the business case there needs to be built into the technology you roll out.
So I'm curious now to explore in-house legal counsel versus law firms and normal legal practices with what we've heard. Are there any differences? Amy, I'll come to you first on that. With regards to internal corporate teams, are you seeing the same trends, the same issues, or are things different?
I mean, it's, you know, Vodafone's pretty well set up to working at home anyway. That was a common way that we worked. So we had, you know, right up to the CEO would work at home reasonably regularly, 1 or 2 days a week. So actually moving to this environment, whilst we're not used to doing it every day, felt quite a normal occurrence. So that's all gone pretty well. I think we are missing seeing each other in the office. I was quite interested to see a questionnaire that came out in the Lawyer this week on Monday, which said, I think it was done a few weeks ago, to your point, Jacqueline, I think people are changing their mind, but the statistics that came out from that questionnaire were that 70% thought that working life would go back to normal once this pandemic was over. And I think we have a sort of probably a different view of that, or maybe I've, you know, a month later moved along. I think we're feeling at the moment that actually our productivity has remained very high within the workplace. I think it helps everybody being at home. I think that's helpful. And that actually maybe we would be moving to a system where you would only go into the office where you need to be in the office, where you're having a particular workshop or collaboration session, rather than this constant battling traffic and you know, this need to actually have to be in there for no good reason. So from another perspective, Vodafone's definitely looking at its products for the future based on seeing changes in our customers and their workplaces, and supporting them having a much more flexible workplace in the future, supporting field engineers perhaps in using more augmented reality or digital twins, again to cut costs, but also for safety if this pandemic does continue for many months as it may well. So I would suggest that we're seeing you know, it's certainly not things snapping back to normal, but we're expecting things for digital to accelerate.
Thank you, Amy. Mark, I'm going to come to you now, really on the same topic, but, you know, Are we going to think differently about how much office space we have, certainly for law firms or any firm for that matter? Do we need to think differently about, do we all need to travel to work at 9 o'clock and come home at 5? Is there a new norm to different ways of thinking of patterns of work? What do you think that means for legal processes and legal operations?
I think when we see restrictions lift, will be a bit of an acid test, won't it? How many people actually will be willing to get on the tube at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning and be willing to mix with all those other people? So I think that's going to be have a significant impact. And another thing I think we'll notice is a change in our sort of working hours pattern. I really do get a sense, Jacqueline sort of touched on it earlier, I find myself online at 7:30 in the morning as I'm drinking my first cup of coffee and having a little look at work. And will quite often still be online at sort of 9 o'clock in the evening. That's not to say I work right the way through, but that's just to say because it's so much more accessible. And my team are aware of that now, that if I send them an email at 9, 10 o'clock in the evening, I'm not expecting them to reply then. I'm expecting them to reply when they're working. So I certainly think we'll see a shift around that sort of change in our working pattern and the hours we work. It's doing the same hours, but over a sort of elongated period. I think that'll have an impact. I really, sorry, Dave. I was going to say, I really don't think we'll do much about the space straight off, but it's got to now be a business consideration. I really can't believe that we will need the footprint of floor space that we all have currently to carry on normal operations. But there will be people who feel that they need to go in and actually, with colleagues of mine in the Hong Kong office and on a conference we had earlier today, to see them all back in the office already, I thought was really quite telling, because I don't get a sense from my London colleagues that we're going to be so keen to get back in the office. So I do think there's going to be regional differences, and that'll be quite a change. And then the final point around processes, well, I think what we learned very early on in this is a lot of people had to adjust how they worked to be able to work effectively from home. We're learning new processes, and I think people have now become a lot more confident in the technology to support them than perhaps they were before. And that means consideration to changing and adopting new technologies. I think the mindset has changed. And there's certainly in my short time in the legal sector, there's always been talk of, how much does this very old industry need to change to become digitally sort of competent? Well, I think it's at a short, sharp learning curve now. I think a lot more people are comfortable and confident with the technology. I get a real sense that we're going to see that appetite for taking technology and more technology on now coming to the fore. Whereas before, I always felt there was a bit of resistance. It felt a little bit like the sort of technology tail wagging the legal dog. And I think we're going to see a bit of a step change there.
So you think some of that resistance could have been softened or broken down through practical reality of having to do these things rather than resist them? Absolutely.
And, certainly seeing the competency levels of staff and the comfort that they now have in operating these systems. And I've seen a huge uptick in that. And that's, if I look at the IT tickets that are raised to my service desk over a weekend, they've reduced to single figures.
Yeah.
And that's phenomenal. And that really just demonstrates how comfortable people are getting with this technology.
I wonder, Mark, and that's a trend I can say at MW we saw as well in the first couple of weeks, a big spike in support calls, very much orientated about setting up a home and using technology for the first time and getting into habits. And then it dropped off pretty much, like you said, back to single figures. Is that an experience that's reflected with yourselves, Amy, and also Christian? I'll come to you first, Christian.
Yeah, massively. I mean, I talked earlier about sort of 90% of our business was office-based. That we had individuals that effectively had spent careers working in a traditional office environment, wherever their specialist area was. So to suddenly go, right, you can't come in now, but you need to carry on at home, that was a big shift for them. And that was at all levels, because some of our senior partners had kind of weren't or had limited exposure at working at home, all the way through to the most junior apprentice. So getting them geared up for that environment, both technically, socially, it has been a big shift. And I think previously, I know I was in this camp, took it for granted that actually just technology should just be simple and easy, but actually it's not for a lot of people. So helping to support that shift, everything from getting them monitors and keyboards and kind of a setup at home that is not only comfortable for them, but is also kind of work inducing. Not to say that they're kind of sat out on a sun lounge or out in their garden, enjoying some of this nice weather here in the UK from time to time. But people perhaps weren't geared up for that because they had a morning at home ahead of a doctor's appointment or dentist, etc. They might have worked on the dining room table or the kitchen table, but actually might as well when children were at school. But now everyone's home, and to the example Jacqueline raised, that kind of it's no longer a shock now that the dog's barking or children are being interrupting or kind of things happen at home, because it's very much accepted now as part of the new norm. And I think the stigma's passed on that, certainly.
And I'll bring Amy in on this point on the culture and the new flexible way of working. I've found I use Zoom like we're doing now for this business call. I now have a family quiz every Thursday on Zoom with my grandparents and my parents, and it's a way to come to it. We're using the same technology in the same way, but for different reasons. How do you think the home life culture of using tech aligning now to using the same tech in work? What do you think are some of the wider ramifications of that? Is this a dangerous blend where actually the line between this is work time, this is personal time, this is private time, especially we're talking about the opportunities of being more flexible, are there some risks in there, do you think?
I mean, I think we've had that for a number of years, really. That's this feeling of blending work and private, you know, since the smartphone and we can all get our emails on the phone, that had already started. So, but I'm absolutely sure this has accelerated that. And it is a case of really trying to be very disciplined personally to make sure that you don't extend beyond the days, and also having your sort of, you know, your no-nos, you know, I always do such and such, and those things I need to keep doing to make sure that I'm perform best at work and don't, you know, spiral into mental health difficulties, which can arise with the pressure of having to be on all the time. One of the good things that I feel as this crisis, that the support that Vodafone gave when, you know, we did have to all move to 100% working at home, was the message of making sure you support your family and your situation first, get that organised, sorted out, and then get your work routine built around that. And that just really helped, particularly those members of the team who've got young children at home, to take that pressure off. So I think that was a really important message, and that human side and flexibility is, you know, extremely important. This is a very difficult situation for some people, so we have to look after each other. Certainly it's petered off a little bit now, I think, as we've got used to it, but the first week we had many sort of stand-up calls with our teams in the morning or at the end of the day, checking in, is everybody able to work well, any issues we need to address, just keeping that human side with the team members going much more than we all ordinarily would have done. And I think that's been a real benefit, actually. Just
to endorse that, I mean, the technology, I think at the moment's the easy bit. It's the people, the culture, the mental stability, the humanity, to Jacqueline's point, is kind of where the focus needs to be, because it's just hard. It's hard trying to be honest and open and kind of bring empathy to your conversations when you're talking to a computer screen. So all those kind of traits and characteristics we've developed over our lives and careers that have used us to communicate in the physical realm, we now need to bring those to the digital one, and that's not as easy for a lot of people. So we really need to be mindful of that.
Christian, we're going to keep on that topic and expand it a little bit more. Before I do, what I want to say to everybody listening in or viewing in at the moment is, from this point on, we'd like to hear your comments and your questions. And you can do that in a number of ways. You can use the chat, or you can raise your hand if you wish to come online and give an audio or video question, or you can ask a question through the Q&A function that exists here. And Francis is going to help me organize those questions. So at this moment in time, we're going to carry on, but please begin to put your hand up to ask a question on anything you've heard so far or what we're about to talk about, and I'll try and bring you into this debate as we carry on, because we're already halfway through. So I want to continue with this topic here now of the wellness, well-being, and also the element of diversity and inclusion, and how you look after diversity and inclusion in the home place when you're in people's personal homes and they're not together, they're not communal in one place, and looking after people's mental well health when you're not necessarily always connected to them, and it might be more difficult to stay in tune with how people are feeling. Jacqueline, I'm going to bring you back into the debate on this point.
Yeah, so, well, I mean, I do think that, to Amy's point, it is easy for most. Most have adapted, shall we say, to working at home under lockdown conditions. But there are also those who, never achieve that, anything like that work-life balance, because you've got more childcare for yourself, you've got more homeschooling, clearly there's a lot of domesticity hitting you right in the face, whether you're male or female, and not to mention the thorny question of domestic abuse scenarios. So it isn't great for everybody. And, inclusion means we just have to be mindful of that, because it's not just about the tech. It's not just about mental health. There's a context as well. So, so just bear that in mind in terms of diversity and inclusion. And I think that's a very difficult one to solve. We can solve for the masses, but there's always going to be those on the fringes. And then, infrastructure laid on top of that, rural versus cities. So city broadband and the ability to work effectively, super. But out in the sticks, not always so great. And, there is then this question around crazy ideas that the virus can be transmitted through 5G, question mark, exclamation mark, and, people burning down 3 and 4G masts, which is entirely unhelpful when, everyone's working super hard to get connectivity across the country. So there's a lot of really bizarre things happening, but there's also some really great things. And there is a huge amount of humanity out there. I think there are communities that reach out to people that they've never spoken to before as well. And even though social distancing is in place, there's so much generosity, and I'm very grateful to be able to see and witness that as well. And the pandemic does bring out the best in us as well.
Amy, I'm going to bring a question to you, actually, which has been asked by one of our attendees today from Cyril Naffa, who asks, do you believe that working remotely, especially for lawyers, is likely to reduce the level of stress inherent with the legal practice and enable lawyers to keep the same focus as in an office setting? What's your thoughts on that, Amy?
Well, I would hope so, actually, because I think this has proved that you can be just as productive, if not, quite frankly, more productive at home. So hopefully that stigma of that some companies may have had, that you need to be in the office really to be most effective, will no longer be there. And that does, certainly, obviously it is more stressful with the kids around, but when they're back at school, the commuting is definitely a stressful part of many people's journey. And having the option to be much more flexible, I think that's got to be something that we should embrace in the future, that flexibility. I think, just picking up on one point I said earlier, that feeling, and we all feel it, of never really ending and starting your workday properly and it blending in, really we have to be really clear with ourselves and really make sure that we stick as far as we can with the structure. And certainly I always have certain things where, once a day, go for a walk or a run or something. And if I don't do that, I know that I'm not as productive and effective. And it's agreeing those little things. It might not be that for you. It might be something completely different, but it's agreeing those things that, keep that stress down. I think that's really important to stick to.
I do wonder, if perhaps this is slightly different depending on where you are in your career, though. I wonder, a young lawyer trainee, whether it's going to be slightly more stressful for them not having that comfort of years of knowledge behind them, and not having that senior associate or the very learned partner to be able to guide, whether it might be for them. And I'm certainly conscious of that with the younger members of my team, and making sure that that so to your point, Amy, absolutely, that they find that they do set themselves their routine, and they do think about that, and they do know that senior leaders are available. So I do wonder if it's slightly different. For me, I think that I don't miss my morning commute, but I really miss my evening commute, because my evening commute was almost my sort of demarcation line. You know, it was, I'm going to do the evening standard crossword and Sudoku before I get home. And then when I got home, I knew I'd switched off. And not having that now means that, you know, my sort of day will drift a little later into the evening than it would have done.
So there's this blending, this lack of demarcation, which sometimes is useful to draw a line under a period and move into a new zone of thinking, family time, personal time for the evening, and it's quite clear cut when you can
cassette out and park that for the night and back to it tomorrow. Yeah.
Now, we have another question that's come in through our Q&A, and there's sort of two parts to this. I'm going to come to you, Christian, first, and then Jacqueline. I'm going to separate it out. The first bit is to you, Christian, which is going back to the user adoption topic, which is a challenge. Christian mentioned that shadow IT is not a problem in modern enterprise IT. Could he elaborate on that as to what he's experiencing? And there's a second part of that, which I'm going to go to Jacqueline on, which is also educating users remotely. How are companies tackling that? What does it mean for the new world of training and coaching? So we'll come to you first, Christian, and then to Jacqueline.
Sure. Firstly, I think my opening address there around shadow IT not being a problem in modern enterprise, I think was perhaps more flippant to my following comments. But I guess the reality is that shadow IT is just part of the modern enterprise. And the crux of the issue comes down to, I guess, what's the security risk or what's the technology risk to your organization? The fact, I guess, the reason it exists predominantly is, and to kind of paraphrase Gates on one of his earlier quotes, was that employing a lazy person to do a hard job, they're going to find an easy way to do it. So clearly your teams, your people are using shadow IT, either because they can't get that same level of output from their current technology stack, or they're not aware of it. So a big part of that then is kind of asking yourself, well, why is it being used in the first place? And that's something should really go to the heart of your technology strategy, because you don't want that in the main. You also want to encourage innovation and opportunities for feedback into how you run and operate your business. So that's going to be paramount. I guess the point there about not necessarily being a big worry for you is more akin to having the right controls in place to mitigate that risk. So if people are using PDF converters or expense management kind of software on their devices, but actually doesn't pose a risk to them as an individual or us as a business, then that's not in our kind of gambit say they should or shouldn't be using it, but actually gives us an idea as to kind of perhaps innovation or improvements we could be making. So I think it comes down to that fundamentally.
Thank you. And Jacqueline, just to complement the question I've already put to you, Lucian Pierce has asked, do you think that if we continue working remotely and it becomes the norm, we will still be able to train them as effectively if we don't have that regular actual in-person interaction?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I guess the lockdown's been really interesting, and I wonder if I asked everybody on this call, have you learned a new skill whilst you've been under lockdown? I imagine the answer might actually be yes, having recently completed a cartooning workshop, for example. And I know, again, I'm making light of it, but actually something that was already happening before lockdown was a conversation around the idea that lifelong learning matters if we are going to stay, keep up with and keep pace with the change, especially in digital and technology situations. So as we go through our digital life and our digital future, if we don't retrain ourselves every 10 years or less, then I imagine we should fear the rise of the robots, because they are coming. And I think it was Yuval Noah Harari that said, we've got to think about reskilling ourselves every 10 years or less. Actually, I think he's updated that to every 5 years or less now. Because if we don't, we simply won't keep up with with the pace of technology, and I think that's true. So online learning has become quite valuable under lockdown, and also increasingly normal. I think the change will be that it will be more modular, so shorter, sharper inputs, and that we will have an industry accreditation, which means that we can leverage it as we move from role to role. And I think that's the way it will change. And certainly in my role as co-chair of the Institute of Coding, accreditation is becoming a really big opportunity for people to pivot into the industry, and also for people to progress inside the technology sector as we become more, as it becomes more important to adopt and adapt in this new environment.
Thank you, Jacqueline. We're going to take the discussion forward a little bit with a little bit of a new area. We're going to talk about, and there's a question actually from Cyril, which is how can we monitor lawyers' performance in a remote working environment? So how do you manage performance and monitor? Is monitoring, how do you do the monitoring? How's it different from in the office? Mark, why don't you have a stab at that one?
Goodness. It would suggest, wouldn't it, that we score and have some very clear monitoring and performance-related metrics in place already, which I'm not always convinced we do. I think this is a lot around expecting that what do we measure performance by, and is it you've been in the office 5 days a week for the last 5 weeks, or is it the output that you're delivering? And I think the focus now, and this is the management challenge here, is understanding output is really what we want to see. And if somebody can do and deliver output in a shorter time than others, that would suggest that they are performing well. So it's going to be a challenge. But I think with the backdrop that we hopefully are not all going to be working remotely forever, although we will still see people working with flexibility, we're still going to have people dropping into offices and spending time together. So I think it's a bit of a blend, but certainly we're going to move away from your conventional sort of KPI metric type performance management and measurement versus output and expectations. So setting of smart objectives at the start of your year and regularly meeting with your people to make sure that they're meeting those objectives, and candid 360 feedback appraisals, all these good things that we've been talking about for however many years and perhaps haven't quite implemented as well as we should. I think that's the way we're going to have to go.
Our focus at the moment, and one of the attendees has made this point, has been very focused on employees and tech. What are the panel's views on the client and our interaction with clients and the impact of these different ways of working? Anyone want to take a lead on that one first?
I wouldn't mind taking that one first. I think it's an opportunity now to really innovate on that human interaction, whether it is client focused or it's just people focused. I think bringing a level of humanity and innovation to how we engage, I think is the key here. And it's not without its challenge, but actually it can be seen to work. I joined my first virtual wine tasting event last week as a prospective client in the technology industry. I joined in an environment not too dissimilar to this. And we went through the normal kind of meeting or event parlance of introductions and why we were here, and was able to then add a kind of social, personal element to what was a professional meeting. The technology worked. We got insight into everyone's kind of home settings or virtual backgrounds, etc. And it just worked. Now, for me, as perhaps a bit more of a digital native, I found that quite nice and easy. But actually, I think it will involve a real leap of faith in confidence and ability on a lot of people's parts, because they're not used to that interaction. Traditional business development or client engagements either involve lunch or dinner, conferencing, workshops, etc., or business meetings in the traditional sense. So I think it is very much going to change, but I think we'll see the ones that really are able to make the change are being very much innovative in that approach.
Thank you, Christian. Anyone else want to come in on that before I move on?
I think we have a sales team that traditionally would go to visit clients in person, and we have a digital sales team which is remote based in Ireland. And it's been quite interesting over the last few weeks and months how our digital sales team, of course, been training actually our field sales team on how to conduct those sales opportunities in a digital manner. So that's been quite interesting. But we service the top 1,500 multinational customers, and not necessarily the smaller ones, but the bigger ones. But we'd already been seeing a move towards businesses happy to use digital channels to procure complex services. So that move was already happening and likely to happen much more so as we carry on.
I think one thing it does call out is actually the poor practices. There seems to be a lot of, so I guess, well, how can I put this, kind of critique of, I guess, traditional methods that are very much just kind of the pray and spray on email or invites on social media without a kind of a thought to kind of how we are. I mean, one of my realizations was kind of how many CEOs actually had my email address that were writing to me to explain what they were doing as an organization. And there was such a disparity between kind of what was very kind of heartfelt and meaningful and genuine to the one that had just really been kind of carved out as if they were just kind of felt obliged to send that email. And I think it really will kind of hopefully push a change in how people engage. But I think we will still have the email barrage of spam and kind of challenged kind of sales or commercial engagements kind of for a long time to come until they see the benefit that it kind of just doesn't work.
Well, Christian, you just touched on something there on change, which I want to sort of focus in on now. And it's to do with the reality of things we found. Not only can we do differently, but perhaps we can do a little bit better, or certainly in a different way that has consequences. I'm going to pose this now from a viewpoint of risks, the challenges of it, but definitely the opportunities. And Mark, I'm going to come to you first on this, but do we need to face up to needing less support staff in law firms doing manual activities that we've now maybe been able to prove and we can automate and do digitally or do with the client online? Has the argument now been won for digitization and customization and automation of legal processes?
Be very careful how I answer this, knowing that several of my team are online and listening. I think the reality is we will see a reduction in business services support staff as a cost. I think the adoption of a sort of consumption model will become more prevalent across the legal sector. You know, if you have a need, you will go to someone who can provide, and then when you don't, you drift back. Certainly something I've challenged my management team around is, why do I need so many heads in IT in London to support a global firm, you know, in a very expensive part in the city of London, when I could probably consume that service from a provider who's sat better placed to support me somewhere else. So I think there's definitely, there will definitely be more of that. And certainly as we give more thought to how we can use technology to sort of automate processes, how we can use more AI, voice activated chatbots, all that great stuff will really impact. And I certainly think in the next few years, we'll start to see a reduction in sort of in-house teams servicing a practice.
Jacqueline, sometimes the legal market has been accused as being sometimes slow to adopt new technology, but is there a new reality now to what we've gone through, and do you think things will be quite different in this way, not just in law firms, but perhaps in others when it comes to the use of automation?
I certainly think that's true, and the reason I think that's true is because it's now on the board agenda. So how do we make sure we don't miss out on? The first one is survival. So how do we make sure we do more with less? And so digital transformation is right at the top of the agenda and at pace, because we can't afford to, saunter towards it. We've got to embrace it and get there pretty quickly. Secondly, I think, the war on talent is going to be quite interesting. So whilst we may displace people in-house, I think there will be a huge amount of talent required, and always has been in tech, for lots of different skill sets to enable and affect that digital transformation. So I wouldn't worry too much about those people thinking, oh, there's not going to be much. There's just so much opportunity in technology, specifically in the business support and AI and machine learning, and how do we get businesses digitally transformed and keep them there, because it's not a one-time thing. There's a whole industry around making sure we keep up and we keep pace with what's coming next.
Well, Jacqueline, I'm going to bring in a comment from one of our viewers, Paul Berwin, on this, and he's making the point actually about different sizes of firm having different capabilities perhaps to adopt a technology. He puts here, what have firms identified as key gaps in their products or the way services are delivered? We're thinking of secure delivery, review, completion, signature, return of documents. These are all important areas which a few of the smaller, the mid-sized firms at least, might need to nail down and improve on. Firms at that scale are often very paper-based. So the challenges, we're representing some of the bigger companies here on this call, but the challenges can be different, can't they, for different sizes of firm?
They totally can, but technology does break down the barriers to entry for all of that. So it does mean that you can use tech, and you don't have to be a big firm to take advantage of it. And I think that's just so important, that we understand that the barriers to entry are absolutely smashed when it comes to the use and leverage of technology. And I'm sure Mark may have more to say about that than I, but I have seen the smallest of businesses. I mean, take Zoom as an example. I mean, wow. Who wouldn't want shares in that business, this business? I mean, it's just extraordinary. And the barriers to entry to that were they were up against Cisco, WebEx, and the really big gorillas in this market. And I have to say, I think there is an opportunity for small businesses to just be thinking more ambitiously and a little bit more courageously when it comes to tech, because it's there for everybody, and the barriers to entry are no longer so high.
And it can certainly become a differentiator then, can't it? In the marketplace, that's what will make you different from the big unwieldy beast that can't move quickly with the agility that the client would expect. So back to that point earlier, how do we interact with the client? I think one of the biggest challenges is how do we get more into the minds of the client and deliver to them what they need? And I think if you're a smaller, more agile organization that has adopted technology and really used it to best effect, it becomes a differentiator.
Yeah. And we've already seen disruptors in the market pre-COVID that were starting to do that. So I think it's really just brought the focus onto that now.
When you think about when the MOJ brought divorce online into the service just over a year ago, they were getting something like 40% returns on paper-based forms because of manual error. Now, online forms, because the process corrals you into the right space, they get less than 1% rejected forms. So think about not just the adoption, but the efficiency gains that are coming also are writ large.
I was just going to say that, as a client of law firms, that we always keen to ensure that when services that are delivered to us, we're looking always at ways to reduce the cost, have things delivered in a different way, thinking much more internationally, end to end, that really help us, because we might be reasonably lucky at the moment in the sense that we are a required service to keep our country going, but inevitably, like all businesses, there will be cost impact, and this is a key area where we need the support of law firms to help us in that.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, we have about 10 minutes left, so our time has gone quite quickly. I have a few questions left up on the board. We may have time for a few more, so if you're thinking of posting a question through the Q&A, please do that now, and I'll try and pick up on it. We have two questions slightly of the same theme, so I'll do them together and then come to the panel on them. From one of our attendees, they say, as a future trainee of a law firm myself, based on what Mark touched upon, how do you think training practices for future trainees at law firms need to adapt to this new environment? And then from what might be Robin Kennedy on the name, if lawyers will be working in a largely online environment, what should universities be doing better to prepare its graduates for a different working context? Mark, as you were mentioned, I'll come to you first and then we'll go around the panel.
Yeah, I think we're seeing now that the universities are starting to deliver, and I say that with some confidence, with a daughter who is currently in her first year at Portsmouth University and is now at home and studying and delivering coursework all online. I think the universities have realized that there's a way that they can deliver training remotely and do it well and effectively. There's got to be a blend, I think, now of the training delivery, and it's got to be based around these new scenarios. So ensuring that actually that they do cover how to, how do we do a court hearing online, because we're seeing that happen. They will start to run those scenarios, and I think before this pandemic hit, I don't think we really thought we were going to see the scale of anything like this. So you can't fault people for having not thought of these scenarios. But I certainly think going forward, the training that's delivered to lawyers will be delivered in a different way and will cover events such as this. But I think what will also lead to is, and we touched on this at the very start of this discussion, was changing the way that business is done now. People no longer traveling around the world to go on critical business travel. I really do think we're going to see a change in the way that we do everything, and that will include how lawyers deliver their services, whether that's in court or whether that's to a client, and that will only suggest then that those establishments that deliver that training will change the way they do that as well, and they have to just cover these scenarios. But by the stage that we see that in training, this won't have been uncommon. We would have done this for a significant time, so it will sort of become commonplace.
And Jacqueline, the universities, do they start to need to think quite differently about the preparedness of their students for a different life of work?
Well, I think they have to, because they're not getting income from the foreign students right now, so that's a thing. And secondly, we are working night and day with putting industry groups together with universities to create courses that are aimed at industry-ready talent versus just scholars, shall we say. So we have to be much more targeted in the way we put the courses together. There are conversations around how we make people work ready faster. So the universities and the tech colleges are all working together to make sure that learning online, leveraging platforms like FutureLearn, which is a learning platform, and also the Open University, to make sure we can also learn alongside our current roles as well.
Excellent. Now, in our last few minutes, I want to bring things right back to our places of work and the changes which are just about to happen. And I'm talking about the return to work challenges. So not the fully we're all back out in a new world, but there's probably going to be some delta in the middle where we might be a bit out and a bit in. And that could be entirely challenging, especially if we're having to deal with social distancing at work and other things. So I'm going to bring this back to the panel about perhaps what your thinking is for this next immediate set of challenges which are directly ahead. Christian, I'll start with you and come to Amy afterwards.
Yeah, it's thanks for the impossible question. I guess because at the moment we don't know what that phased return will look like. We are strategically planning for the next 90 days across our business because it would be unfair, unjust, and possibly irresponsible to plan or make any concrete decisions now that will affect the future. So whilst we have some ideas as to what a phased return may look like, at the moment there's certainly nothing set in stone because there are too many variables at play. Certainly with our people, I've got members of my team that are in a high risk category and are quite fearful of returning back, that the fear of the risks that commute might present to them, or even just being in the office with others. But actually, if you are looking at how we are at the moment, I don't think anyone's rushing back, and certainly not interested in rushing back, perhaps other than for the client entertainment, maybe in a more physical kind of social setting. But actually, at the moment, we're just going to take each day as it comes. see how the business, the markets and our clients want us to respond and how we feel is right to respond. And in due course, we will work out whether we allow 30% of our people back in, or the capacity of offices, or certain practices or protocols. But for us at the moment, that's too far in the future to call.
Or maybe the times of the day that people work. One of our questioners here, it's an outstanding question. Are we going to have to get used to working at almost any time of the day, especially maybe if you have an international practice? Will we have to be prepared to have meetings at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning for regular events? But perhaps it's not for that. Maybe the change in the hours is because of this staged working, so that we'd never have more than a certain percentage of people in the office. Is that practical? Could that work?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's very much a mindset and attitude to work, and something I brought to the firm a couple of years ago, that work's something we do than somewhere we are. So finding some of the best cyber talent around, we couldn't conform them then to the traditional 9 till 5 office hours, office-based, dress like a lawyer type of mindset. And that was something we needed to change. And over time, the organisation has changed to support that. And I don't see why that should be the case now, that the work is something you do. And we're seeing that in these kind of difficult times of trying to work at home during a health pandemic. People are doing that. They're online. And I think Mark mentioned he's online at 7:30 and kind of still online in the evening, but taking regular breaks through the day because it fits his lifestyle. Job's still being done. So why would that change?
And Amy, for a large corporate body like Vodafone, how are you coming at these potential new challenges?
So Vodafone was fairly cautious. I say we started working at home before the lockdown, a good period before. So I think we'll probably be fairly cautious in coming out of it. 95% of our employees work from home. It's just the field, people fixing the base stations, etc., generally out. So I don't see, I think it's going to be a period of time before we encounter that. I think for us, the sort of challenges on the ground is that we're still extremely busy trying to meet our business requirements from a BAU perspective, because of course there's still targets to meet, etc. And then we're also trying to pivot our business to support our customers in a new way. And so we've got an almost extra workload actually of trying to manage the two. And how do we support our team doing that when it's obviously will no doubt be a cost-constrained environment for all of us. So I think they're our biggest challenges.
Okay, I think we might be able to squeeze this very last question in. Francis is nodding at me, so we'll try and have a quick go at that, and that would be nice to finish off. What of your long-term technology strategy? Has it now been moved up the agenda because of COVID? Or what areas are being revised or changed in those strategies because of COVID? Mark, do you want to start us with that?
Certainly. So our move to cloud has definitely moved up our agenda. That was before, it was 18 months away, 18 months to 3 years away. That's very much at the front of my agenda.
Right.
I've got my head of IT operations right now. His main effort is bringing out Microsoft Teams and rolling that into the business. So we're doing that on an incredibly aggressive timeline. So that's been interesting and challenging, and it's meant that I'm soft pedaling on other projects, so pushing stuff right that I would have done now as sort of quick wins. There's definitely had an impact, but the move to cloud, I think, and speaking to some peers, are very much that's at the forefront of a lot of agendas.
Yeah, massively. I'd agree with that. We've kind of brought a strapline forward around the modern legal workplace. And really capitalizing on the fact that everyone wants great new technology now, and bringing all the things that come with that. Our CTO's kind of known for the access any information, any device, anywhere kind of sort of approach. That actually this is looking like a new kind of digital workplace for everyone. So we need to start ramping that up and focusing on that so we can safeguard the firm in the future.
But we can't ignore the fact that, a lot of this front-end user stuff is also lipstick on a pig, and that we still have quite a lot of legacy tech that is being tested under the pressure of COVID-19 and the pandemic. So you're seeing, so many notices on corporate websites saying, sorry, we're overwhelmed, we can't cope, please don't call us. So, all of that has to move up the agenda, whether it's sexy or not sexy, it has to get done. Because infrastructure is going to fall over. So I think that, together with staying safe online, whatever that means to you, is actually also moving up the agenda. And yeah, I think also diversity in terms of not just moving towards command and control leadership, which I understand we need in a crisis, but which does force us into very black and white decisions. We need to make sure we hear lots of different voices so that we don't just fall into the narrowest of decision making. Yeah. And that's going to be super important if we're going to win competitively.
Yeah, certainly at MW, we started our digital processes about a year ago, online client portals, automation, digital signatures. What this has put us in a more fortunate position because of that, but it's allowed us to accelerate some of those projects because, going to your point, Mark, there's less resistance and now more people embracing through necessity some of the things we already had in situ, and now actually, please, different divisions are now stepping up saying, can we have e-signatures, please? Can we bring our forms online, please? But before they've been a little resistant, shall I put it that way, and now actually that they're embracing. Francis, I think we may, I'm going to hand over to you. Are we getting to the end of our time?
Yes, we are. And I have to admit, it's a shame to stop the discussion because there's been some fantastic, I think, interaction, but more importantly, information to share with the listeners. But what I would say is, obviously, if anyone's got any questions, do send them through to us. And what we can do is share that with all the panelists, and if they're able to help answer it. But thank you, Jacqueline, very much for joining us. Christian, David for chairing, Mark and Amy. Thank you all very, very much for joining us today for Legal Tech Talks, but more importantly, to discuss actually what's at the forefront is what's going to happen really now and in the future. People really want to know what's going to happen with them and how their lives are going to change. So thank you all, and we look forward to having you again for the next Legal Tech Talks.